بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده أما بعد. Today inshallah we'll be covering chapter 7 which is the chapter regarding the etiquette of attire. And so for the first few paragraphs inshallah we'll just read through the text and then go through the general guidelines that the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam teach us regarding the etiquette of attire. This chapter discusses the general guidelines around attire for men and women, followed by specific types of clothing. So the general guidelines that we find, number one, or I'll just read through the paragraph and then we'll list them. It is necessary to cover one's body, especially the awrah, while clothing that is neither tight nor transparent and that does not resemble the clothing of non-Muslims or that of the opposite gender. And we'll go into detail regarding what that exactly means. Before going into detail though, just to look at what the Quran says regarding attire. In Surah Al-A'raf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, يَا بَنِي آدَمْ قَدْ أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ لِبَاسًا يُوَارِي سُوآتِكُمْ وَرِيشًا وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ ذَلِكَ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَذَّكَّرُونَ. O children of Adam, we have bestowed upon you clothing, قَدْ أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ لِبَاسًا, for two reasons. Number one, yuwari so'atikum, to cover your nakedness. And the second reason, warisha, as a means of beauty, as a means of adornment. So these two reasons Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us clothing. Number one, to cover our awrah, to cover our nakedness. And number two, as a means of adornment. وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ, and it is the clothing of righteousness which is best. ذَلِكَ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَذَّكَّرُونَ. Such are among the signs of Allah that they may receive admonition. So in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the two principal reasons for clothing: to cover ourselves and for beauty. And the second thing that's mentioned in this ayah is the libasut taqwa. And this is obviously a metaphor. A person doesn't wear taqwa. It's not a thobe you can buy. But wearing taqwa meaning you adopt taqwa. You live a life of consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So by saying that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala isn't negating covering yourself properly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala isn't saying that the libas of taqwa is the best, hence you don't really need to care about covering yourself for beauty or covering your nakedness. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, need to cover yourself properly, number one. Number two, on top of that, if it's without taqwa, then it's not useful. You need to make it useful, hence adopt taqwa, and that is what is best. Sometimes people take this ayah and flip it around and say, well, the libas of taqwa or taqwa is what is most important. The rules and guidelines don't really matter, right? وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ. But that's not the spirit of the ayah. The spirit of the ayah is saying cover yourself and adopt taqwa. Do not be from amongst those that cover themselves properly, but yet they are empty from taqwa from the inside. Adopt both. In the next ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us regarding the deception of shaitan. Ya bani Adam la yaftinannakum ash-shaytan. Don't let shaitan deceive you. كما أخرج أبويكم من الجنة ينزع عنهما لباسهما ليريهما سوآتهما. Like how he deceived or how he tempted your parents out of paradise and caused their cover to be removed in order to expose their nakedness. إنه يراكم هو وقبيله من حيث لا ترونهم. Verily he, meaning shaitan, and his soldiers, his other shayateen, they watch you from where you cannot see them. So shaitan, he's from amongst the jinn. كَانَ مِنَ الْجِنِّ فَفَسَقَ عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِ. Allah teaches us in the Quran that shaitan is from amongst the jinn. And so we cannot, we cannot see them unless they expose themselves to us. So here in the ayah, إِنَّهُ يَرَاكُمْ, they see you. هُوَ وَقَبِيلُهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا تَرَوْنَهُمْ, in the way that you cannot see them. إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا الشَّيَاطِينَ أَوْلِيَاءَ لِلَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Verily the devils, they are allies of those that disbelieve. So in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us against the deception of shaitan, specifically regarding our clothing. Don't let shaitan deceive you. That's what we see in today's day and age. There is an attempt, an effort to remove clothing, to free people from the confines of clothing, to make it seem backward, to cover yourself. Right? And so shaitan, زَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ أَعْمَالَهُم. Shaitan, he beautifies their actions. So he beautifies the fact that they are taking off their clothes. The ones that don't have their clothes on are on the magazine covers, they're being paid millions, etc., etc., etc. And the ones that wear clothing are being embarrassed or ashamed that they cover themselves and being called oppressed, etc. So this is from the deception of shaitan regarding clothing. We went through the first paragraph of the chapter, and in that first paragraph he mentions 4 out of the 6 general guidelines regarding clothing. Number 1, to cover the awrah. So to make sure that our satr is properly covered. Number 2, to not let it be tight or transparent. In fact, from the signs of the Day of Judgment, the Prophet ﷺ mentions that there will be such people that wear clothing. They're wearing clothing, but it is as if they are naked. And this is an indication towards wearing tight or transparent clothing. Number 3, not to be extravagant. And this is not only regarding clothing, but all spheres of life. Being extravagant is something which is disliked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hence a person should not be extravagant, not show off, not spend too much money on their clothing. And what this means is, say for example, a person spending more than what he earns on clothing, or he has obsession with clothing, having more than what they actually need, way more than what they actually need, and hoarding it. This would be extravagant. So number 3, not to be extravagant. Number 4, not to show off. It is permissible, completely permissible, for a person to wear expensive clothing, to wear, what we would call brand name clothing, to have the best clothing, the best watch, the best, etc., etc., etc. You can wear what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided you with. In fact, in some texts of Fiqh, they write that it is out of the gratitude that a servant shows Allah, that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed them with lots of wealth, that they show gratitude in using that wealth to dress beautifully. The very famous hadith, Allah is beautiful and loves beauty. So hence, if a person does it out of gratitude for Allah, that, oh Allah, you've given me so much and I'm doing this out of what you've given me, just like when we give someone a gift and they use that gift. Right? We give someone a gift and they wear that clothing. It brings happiness to the gift giver. So in the same way, a person wears the clothing, wears beautiful clothing, that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided them with, it is completely permissible and even rewarding if you're doing it out of the pleasure of Allah. But if a person does it to belittle other people, that I've got better clothing than you, I can afford better clothing than you, or to show off that I've got the newest this and the latest this and the most expensive this, then this would actually be a means of sin. Number 5, not to resemble the clothing of non-Muslims, and that's what's mentioned in the last, in the first paragraph here. It does not resemble the clothing of non-Muslims. The question usually arises, what is the clothing of non-Muslims? This is specific to any sign, any shi'ar, any specific clothing which is specific to another religion. So for example, wearing the cross, or for example, wearing the sheets that the Buddhist monks will wear, the orange clothing. This is specific to their religion. If a person sees this, they automatically think that's a Buddhist monk, or they automatically think, if there's a cross, that this is a Christian symbol. Hence, to wear anything which is specific to another religion would also be against the etiquette of attire. Number 6 would not to resemble the clothing of the opposite gender. Moving on to the second paragraph, it is sunnah to wear either an izar, lower ihram-like garment, or sirwal, while the latter is more concealing. So what we would call in the subcontinent, in the Indian subcontinent, a lungi or a dhoti. This is what the Prophet ﷺ would normally wear, what we wear in ihram. And to wear sirwal or pants is also permissible. It's found in the ahadith that the Prophet ﷺ had a pair of normal, what we would sirwal in the Arabic language, pants. And there's a difference of opinion whether the Prophet ﷺ wore them or not, but he owned a pair. And then it mentions, while the latter is more concealing. While wearing an izar, one should be cautious of his sitting and lying posture. What this means is, if you're going to wear an izar, make sure you know how to wear it. If you don't wear an izar and then expose yourself, lay down in the masjid, and you want to make sure you know how to wear one. And that's why you'll find when we have Hajj seminars, etc., scholars recommend that you wear the ihram beforehand while you're at home. Practice wearing it, practice walking around with it, practice sitting with it, because we're not used to wearing it. Hence, sometimes people forget or become lax in regards to the way they conduct themselves while wearing these clothing. Of course, if a person wears it normally, they become expert at it. And then for a person that goes for Hajj or Umrah and they see someone that's an expert, then you envy that person. You wish you knew how to, wear it properly and be an expert at it. So if you are wearing an izar, or if you're in ihram at Hajj or Umrah, be cautious of your sitting, your lying posture, etc. Because you could expose your satr. The lower garment of a man should be between his ankles and his shin, whereas the garment of the woman will be long enough to entirely cover her feet. We find in the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ many encouragements to keep our clothing, our lower garment above the ankle, and caution and warnings regarding those that don't. For example, this hadith reported by Imam Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ mentions, whatever is below the izar, if it's below the ankles, then it's in the fire of Jahannam. In another hadith reported by Imam Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ said, there's three people that Allah will neither look at nor praise on the Day of Judgment, and their punishment will be a painful punishment. Number one, the one who wears his garment below his ankles. Number two, the one who reminds others of his favors. In Urdu they say ihsan jutlana, to remind someone else. Remember I helped you here. Remember I helped you there. Remember I gave you this then. This is the second person. And the third, the one who sells his product by means of making false oaths. So these people neither will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala look at, neither praise on the Day of Judgment. Another hadith, Hudayfa radiallahu anh says, the Prophet ﷺ took hold of the muscle of my calf and he said, this is where the izar should stop. And if you insist, it may be lower, but should not reach the ankles. In another hadith, Ibn Umar radiallahu anh said, I passed by the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and my izar had slipped down below the ankles. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, oh Abdullah, pick up your lower garment. So he said, I picked it up. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, pick it up more. So he said, I picked it up more. And then I always made sure that it was pulled up properly after that. Some people asked, where did you pull it up to? He said, to mid-calf length. So this is what is found in the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, to wear one's lower garment above the ankles. Now there's something that we all maybe have heard before and hear many times, is that as long as it's not out of pride, it is permissible. And this comes from the hadith, and usually the hadith of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is quoted. It's quoted as a reason for why you can wear your pants below your ankles, and there's a minority opinion out there that if it's, as long as it's not out of pride, it's permissible. But if a person actually reads the context of the hadith, and you read the full hadith and not just use the illah that's mentioned in the hadith, you'll see that it wasn't a general permission for anyone to lower their garments under their ankles, and claim that it's not out of pride. In fact, in the hadith, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he says, my lower garment would slip down and I would continuously pick it up and try my best to keep it above my ankles. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, if it falls below, then you're not doing it out of pride, so it is forgiven. So in the hadith, there isn't a clear permission. If there was a clear permission, then the Sahaba would have then continued to wear theirs below their ankles and say, well, it's not out of pride. In fact, in the hadith, you see Abu Bakr radiallahu anh continuously pulls it up, and throughout the remainder of his life also keeps it above his ankle. But the Prophet ﷺ said, if it happens to fall below, then it is forgiven if it is not out of pride. So it's not a general statement of permission, but you will find the minority opinion out there that if it is done not out of pride, then it is permissible. Scholars caution, though, that it is best to keep it above the ankles due to the number of ahadith. This is just a few. There are many, many more ahadith regarding this issue. To read the last paragraph under the general guidelines. It is permissible to wear expensive clothing or to wear new ones frequently, as long as one is free from showing off or wasting money. I mentioned this in the general guidelines. One should wear expensive clothing occasionally to show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy on him. But it is more befitting to wear humble clothing on a regular basis. There is no dislike in wearing fur or other animal skin as long as it was tanned. Tanned meaning it goes through a purification process, even if it's a permissible animal that was slaughtered non-Islamically. So as long as it's not pig, any other animal, say it's a cow or any other animal that's leather is used, as long as the skin or the fur was tanned, it went through a purification process, then it would be permissible to use. Of course, if it is from pig, then it is impermissible. The last sentence in this section: it is disliked for men to wear yellow, saffron, or pure red clothes. While black clothes are permissible to wear, it is not permissible to wear them in mourning. So it mentioned that it's disliked, or makruh tanzihi, the lower level of makruh in the Hanafi fiqh. And the discussion is obviously a little bit more nuanced. These are just some ahadith regarding the previous paragraph. A person who wears a garment in vanity out of pride, Allah will make him wear a garment of humiliation on the Day of Judgment. And then He will set it ablaze with the fire. And then regarding not imitating women, the Prophet ﷺ said, cursed those men. The Prophet ﷺ cursed those men who imitate women and women who imitate men. So from amongst the guidelines we mentioned, not imitating the opposite gender. Now, the issue of colors, like I mentioned, it is a little bit more nuanced. Generally, there's no objection in any color of clothing. Generally, it's permissible. There's nothing wrong with wearing any color of clothing, but you will find some exceptions from the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ. It becomes evident through some narrations that it's prohibited or disliked, not prohibited, but disliked to wear certain colors. The Prophet ﷺ prohibited men, so this is only specific to men, from wearing dark red dyed clothing in the hadith mu'asfar, saffron clothing, and dark yellowish orange clothing. Imam Tabari rahimahullah, he says, I believe the wearing of clothing in every color is permissible, except that I would dislike the wearing of that garment which is completely red and also predominantly red outwear, as this is not the clothing of honorable people in our time. So the Prophet ﷺ disliked and prohibited specific clothing, the red color, saffron color, orangish yellow color as well. And scholars say this was out of, again, imitation of women, that they would wear bright colored clothing. Hence scholars say it would be makruh if a person does wear these colors, but if it is mixed in with other colors, then it is permissible. For we find in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam wore red clothing himself, but it was striped with other clothing, with other colors. So it would be permissible if it's mixed in with other colors, and this is mentioned here. Also, the last sentence here, we're taking questions after the session, inshallah. That while black clothing is permissible, if you wear it out of mourning, then this would be impermissible. So we find in certain cultures, if a person passes away or at a sad time, they wear black clothing. This is something which would be impermissible because it's not found in the Sharia. The Prophet ﷺ himself wore black. He preferred white, of course, the Prophet ﷺ. He also wore green and red, but like I mentioned, it was striped with other colors. So the discussion of this is a little bit more nuanced than just it being makruh. Hence, if a person does abstain from it, it would be rewarding if they're doing it out of the love of the Prophet ﷺ and his prohibiting certain colors. The white color is the most preferred color by the Prophet ﷺ. Hadith reported by Abu Dawood, the Prophet ﷺ said, wear white clothing because they are the best of your clothing. Khiyaru thiyabukum. And shroud your dead in it as well. So that's why you find that the kafan is also white. In another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, wear white clothes because they are more pure and more clean. And the best clothing in which you meet Allah is in your graves and in your masajid is white. So when you meet Allah and when you are visiting the houses of Allah, you want to be wearing white, and this is what is preferred, or what was preferred by the Prophet ﷺ. And so this is something that we wear out of love of the Prophet ﷺ, that he preferred this color, and so we also try our best to wear the clothing that was loved by the Prophet ﷺ. So the white color was most preferred by the Prophet ﷺ. The next section is regarding silk, gold, and silver. It is well known that silk and gold is impermissible for men to wear in this world. They are both, though, permissible for women. So silk and gold were permissible for women. The Prophet ﷺ mentions in a hadith, impermissible for the men of my ummah. This hadith reported by Imam Tirmidhi, the Prophet ﷺ said, gold and silk have been made lawful for the women of my ummah and prohibited for the men. In another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ held some silk in his right hand and gold in his left. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, these two have been prohibited for the males of my ummah. So these two things have been categorically prohibited for men from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, from his practice, his prohibitions. The Prophet ﷺ prohibited this. However, for silk, there's details regarding silk, and the reason for this is much of the silk that we find in the markets today is either manufactured or completely synthetic. So silk that is produced by a silkworm will be unlawful. However, synthetic silk or manufactured silk is lawful. Similarly, if the silk content of a garment is less than 50% in comparison to other materials, then it will be permissible to wear the garment without any detestability in the Hanafi fiqh. And this comes from the principle that if something is a minority, then the whole does not take the ruling of the minor. So hence, if it's less than 50%, it would be permissible to wear. There is details regarding this. For example, and I'll just read the first paragraph out of the text. However, so it is haram for men to wear silk and gold, whereas both are permissible for women. However, if a shopkeeper puts a silk garment on his shoulders to demonstrate it, it will be permissible as long as he does not enter his hands into the sleeve. The reason for mentioning this is as long as a person's not wearing it. So you can use it for bed sheets, you can use it for other reasons, and for a person that's selling it, they can demonstrate it as long as they're not going to wear it while demonstrating it. Again, making sure they're not wearing it. It is permissible to have silk sheets and to sit on them. So as long as you're not wearing it is what is prohibited. The last section, or the second to last section, has to do with clothing with animate objects. And something to remember regarding animate objects, and this includes pictures of human beings, this includes pictures of animals, that creating them, drawing them, painting them, would be impermissible, what we find in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But wearing them is something which would be disliked. And if a person specifically wears something while in salah, then this would also make the salah disliked or be makruh. A person would not completely receive the fadila or the virtues, the blessings and the rewards of the salah. So it is disliked to wear clothing that has an image of an animate object. There are many details regarding what is actually an animate object. You know, is an outline considered an animate object? And so, from what I remember, if it's just an outline, for example, you know, logos like the Puma logo or the Ralph Lauren horse, because it's an outline and there isn't details of the face, and sometimes it's just a shadow, then it would be permissible and not disliked. But if there are details specifically of the head, because there is a saying of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, in which he mentions if the face and the head is not seen, then that takes out the complete ruling of an animate object. And so if you look at the faces of many of the logos, they're either just shadows or just an outline of it, so it would be permissible. Of course, ideally a person would like to stay away from it. Similarly, it is disliked to have the image of an animate object on the qibla wall or on a pillow. The reason for this is you don't want there to be any type of tashabbuh, any type of similarity of a picture and then on the qibla wall where you will be praying towards. This is obviously from amongst the practices of those that worship idols or worship different things. To put a picture up while a person is making sajda in that direction would be disliked. So you want to stay away from that as well. The pillow as well, pillows can be used as means of reverence, hence that is also included in this. However, if the pillow is used to recline on or an image is on a carpet placed on the floor, then it is not disliked. Why? Because you are covering the object, or either you are disrespecting the object. You're not putting it in a high place where you are making sajda towards. It's either on the floor or on a pillow that's being reclined on, so it would not be disliked. Furthermore, it is not disliked if the image is covered by an outer garment. If the image is missing the head, then it is not disliked even if hung on the wall. These rulings of animate objects, however, are related to wearing and hanging of the image. And so it's makruh to wear these images or hang these images. And this comes from the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ, the very famous hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ mentioned the angels not entering a household where there are pictures. The creation of the image, though, itself would be haram. So there's a difference between making the image, painting it, drawing it, versus having it on one's clothing or having it within the home. So it would just be ideal, of course, to abstain from wearing these things specifically during the salah. The last section is regarding the turban or the imamah of the Prophet ﷺ. It is sunnah to wear a turban and to hang the tail between the shoulders. The turban may be of any length or color. We find in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he would normally wear white, but during the Fathu Makkah, during the victory of Makkah, during the conquest of Makkah, the Prophet ﷺ wore black, a black turban. And it is also reported that the Prophet ﷺ wore turbans of different colors, including green. If one wants to retie the turban, he should first undo it instead of pulling it off at once. It is sunnah to wear a cap without a turban. These sunan, which have to do with the habits of the Prophet ﷺ, and I just want to mention this before we end. These are known as sunnah aada. There's the sunnah which is sunnah huda, a sunnah which is a means of guidance. So we see the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, the akhlaq of the Prophet ﷺ, his ibadat, his practices. These are all the sunnah that the Prophet ﷺ left for us to be a means of guidance in his worship, in his akhlaq, etc. When it comes to his habits, the clothing that he wore, alayhi salatu wasalam, or the food that he ate, alayhi salatu wasalam, then this would be known as sunnat aada. These were just the habits of the Prophet ﷺ. And in following these habits, of course, sunnah huda, we are highly encouraged, emphasized to follow those sunnahs. Ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasul. Follow Allah, follow His Rasul. Those are the sunnat huda, the guidance, the aspects of worship, the aspects of akhlaq. Where it comes to his aada, the habits of the Prophet ﷺ, that if a person follows these as well, then it will be a means of reward, according to many scholars, majority of the scholars. It's a means of reward because you're doing it out of the love of the Prophet ﷺ. That the Prophet ﷺ ate such food, and I'm doing it out of his love, then you are rewarded for the love that you have for the Prophet ﷺ. And to encourage or to create love of the Prophet ﷺ within our hearts, I find two things. Number one, read his life. If you read the life of the Prophet ﷺ, then it will naturally bring within you a love of the Prophet ﷺ. And secondly, reading the lives of the companions, radiallahu anhum. This will also bring a love within our hearts. The reason why sometimes we question the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is because there's a shortcoming on our part on loving the Prophet ﷺ. Scholars say there's three reasons why we as human beings create love within our hearts. Number one is external beauty. Right? When a person sees something beautiful, it may be a person, it may even be something else, any creation of Allah. You see a waterfall, or you see beautiful buildings, or you see a beautiful car. Externally it's beautiful, so there's a love that's created within the heart. So the first reason is external beauty. The second reason why love is created within the heart is internal beauty. When a person, say for example, you know somebody that has beautiful akhlaq. Externally they may not be beautiful, but they have beautiful akhlaq. You love them because of their internal beauty, because of their qualities, their loyalty, their trust, their honesty. This is what you love about. These are internal qualities that create love within the heart. And this is not only specific to human beings. You'll see this in animals as well. A person will love an animal because the animal is a loyal animal, or the animal does work. So this is internal beauty that creates love within the heart. So the first reason, external beauty. Second reason, internal beauty. The third reason scholars mention why love is created within our heart is when you learn that someone or a certain system or something has benefited you or protected you or defended you in your absence, then this also creates love within the heart. So for example, you heard someone was speaking bad about you, and there was a third person that stood up and said, no, you know what, I only know good of that brother. Or the person defended you, or even physically. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save us all. But if there's a physical altercation and someone defends you or fights on your behalf, it creates love within your heart. So these three reasons, even though you may not be friends with that person, you may not even know that person, but the person just stood up and said, hey, about Brother Muhammad, I know he's a good person. I work with him, he's like this, he's like that. Now if you hear it as a third person, hey, that brother, he spoke up on your behalf, he defended you. You may not like that person, you may not know that person, you may not be friends with that person, but internally it creates a love within your heart. Why? Because he stood up for you, he defended you, he took your side. So these three reasons create love within our heart. External beauty, internal beauty. And thirdly, when you know someone has stood up on your behalf, spoken for you, or defended you. If we fit the Prophet ﷺ into these three categories, you will find that we have no other reason than to just fall in love with the Prophet ﷺ. When it comes to external beauty, read the Shama'il of Imam Tirmidhi. The external beauty of the Prophet ﷺ is detailed, and beautifully detailed. The internal beauty, we know of the akhlaq of the Prophet ﷺ. It was the Prophet ﷺ's akhlaq that brought so many people to Islam. This is what's mentioned in the Quran. فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. Allah says, if you had to be harsh and strict, then all of these companions that you see with you, they would have all run away. So it was from the akhlaq of the Prophet ﷺ that so many people fell in love with the Prophet ﷺ. People would come abuse the Prophet ﷺ. One hadith, a man came and grabbed the Prophet ﷺ by his cloak and shook him so hard that the cloak left a mark on the neck of the Prophet ﷺ. He asked for money. The Prophet ﷺ, Sahaba of course, became upset, but the Prophet ﷺ smiled and said, give the man what he wants. So the Prophet ﷺ had beautiful akhlaq. Secondly, and the third thing, the fact that the Prophet ﷺ made dua for us before we even existed. The fact that the Prophet ﷺ expressed his love for us before we even existed. The fact that on the Day of Judgment, the Prophet ﷺ will intercede on our behalf is enough for us to absolutely love the Prophet ﷺ. So these two things, I would say, are the best ways to inculcate within us the love of the Prophet ﷺ. You have to know him. You're not going to know about his external beauty, internal beauty, or how he defended us or spoke up for us unless you read the life of the Prophet ﷺ or learn the life of the Prophet ﷺ in any way, shape, or form, whether it's through reading, listening to lectures, podcasts, etc. And the second thing, learning from the lives of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, because when you read their love for the Prophet ﷺ, you will see how that affects you. Just one hadith that comes to mind is Urwat ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. Before he accepted Islam, he was the negotiator at Hudaybiyah. And when he goes to negotiate, from the side of the Quraysh, he went to the Prophet ﷺ, he went to the camp of the Muslims to negotiate with the Prophet ﷺ, and he saw how the Sahaba loved, revered, and honored the Prophet ﷺ. He came back to Mecca and he told the Quraysh, listen, he says, Wallahi laqad wafattu ala al-muluk. He says, listen, I've seen the kings of the world. He was someone, he was a diplomatic person. He would go to the different, he was good at negotiating. He went to different, the different empires and talked to them. So he says, Wallahi laqad wafattu ala al-muluk. He said, listen, I've been to all of, I've seen many kings. He said, I've seen wafattu ala Kisra wa Kaysar wa Najashi. I went to Najashi's court, I went to Kisra's court, Qaysar's court. I've been to all of these places, I've seen all of these kings. But he said, I've never seen any people love their leader مَا يُعَذِّمُ أَصْحَابُ مُحَمَّدٍ مُحَمَّدًا. Like I've seen the Sahaba, the companions of Muhammad love, honor, and revere him. They said, what was it? He says, even if the Prophet ﷺ spits or mucus had to come out, it would إِلَّا وَقَعَتْ فِي كَفِّ رَجُلٍ مِّنْهُمْ. It would fall, someone would be sitting there taking it. Right? And this is something that's against, if we had to think about this, we would maybe, because of the way we've understood it, we would say, hey, that's disgusting. But the Sahaba would sit there and they would wait for the wudu. كَادُوا يَقْتَتِلُونَ عَلَى وُضُوئِ. The Prophet ﷺ would make wudu, and as the water is falling off of his blessed body, there would be companions there collecting that water. When the Prophet ﷺ would say something, he said they would all hasten to follow his order. If the Prophet ﷺ just made an ishara, indication that he wanted something, the Sahaba would be there. So he said, I've never seen any, and you can read the hadith in detail, it's found in Bukhari, very beautiful hadith. You see the love that the companions had for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the life of Abdullah ibn Umar, the lives of their companions. They saw what a perfect human being he was, alayhi salatu wasalam. And they saw that in following his ways, that is the shortest and the quickest way to also gain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for us to try to learn the life of the Prophet ﷺ, inculcate his love in our life, would be a means of happiness for us, not only in this world, but a means of happiness for us in the hereafter. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all tawfiq. Subhanallah wa bihamdi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Jazakumullahu.